Prelude to Revolution paper slide.
By Stephen Baranowski and Craig Cleveland. Navigation Acts were a series of laws that restricted the use of foreign ships for trade between Britain and its colonies. The purpose of the Navigation Acts was to encourage British shipping and allow Great Britain to retain the monopoly of British colonial trade for the benefit of British merchants.
Salutary neglect. British policy in the 13 colonies which allowed colonists to flout or violate the laws associated with trade. There was no effective law enforcement agencies back then. It was too expensive to send British troops to America, and the time period lasted from 1690s to 1760s, and it boosted the colony's profits. It violated the Navigation Acts by allowing colonists to trade with whomever they wanted and have to use English ships.
The Proclamation of 1763 was established after the French and Indian War to prevent the colonists from expanding into the territory of Indians that helped the British during the war. Once the proclamation line was established, men, walls, and other defenses were put up. Since these had to be paid for, the British said that the defenses were protecting the colonists as an alibi to make the colonists pay for that.
The Sugar Act was a British law passed in 1764 that was designed to raise revenue from the colonists, set a tax on sugar and molasses imported into the colonies, which impacted the manufacture of rum in New England. It had an economic impact on the colonists because at the time the colonists were going through financial difficulties. It encouraged colonists to break law by bribing officials and smuggling goods.
The Sons of Liberty were a group of artisans and shopkeepers who started out as the Loyal Nine. Soon they were agitated and they became the Sons of Liberty. They were agitated by the Stamp Act, and the main way that they undermined it was with publicity, because most of the Sons were printers and publishers.
Stamp Act. A fee that colonists had to pay almost on every piece of paper used for legal documents. It required nearly every paper item to be printed on stamped or embossed paper. Colonists thought the Stamp Act as detrimental, and it planted the seeds of rebellion in the colonies. It required licenses, documents, and diplomas, and nearly every paper item to be printed on stamped or embossed paper. Colonists were outraged and violent towards the Stamp Act.
Quartering Act were two laws passed by Parliament. It forced local colonial governments to house and provide provisions for British soldiers. This is one of the main things that led to the Boston Tea Party. Britain did this because it was too expensive to ship soldiers back to Britain, and they were already in debt from the French and Indian War.
Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre wasn't really that bad because only 5 people died when compared to the war, thousands died. It was bad though because the British were the murderers, and the tension between the colonies and Britain were so high, so Samuel Adams used the killings to start propaganda campaigns against the British.
The Gaspee Affair was caused because of a gluttonous captain of a British customs ship. Lieutenant William Dudington and his crewmates had strict orders and generous financial rewards to eradicate illegal smuggling along the American coast. The attack, planned by Abraham Whipple with about 10 longboats and 8 men each, came up silently to the Gaspee and burned it.
The Tea Act was a way to bail out British East India Company and expand the company's monopoly on tea. It was a follow-up to the Revenue Act that set a tax on tea, paint, paper, lead, and glass. Upset the colonists, which caused them to refuse to buy goods. Parliament replaced all the taxes except the one on tea.
The Boston Tea Party was caused because of taxation without representation. The colonists believed that Great Britain was taxing them excessively and unfairly to make up for the debt from the French and Indian War. In this event, the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Indians to signify that they identified more American than British. Also, 340 chests of tea were dumped in the Boston harbor that night. That much tea would weigh about 92,000 pounds and would be worth $1.7 million. Also, that amount of tea that they dumped could have made 18,523 cups of tea.
Intolerable acts was aimed at the punishment of the people who took part in the Boston Massacre. The 5 acts closed the port of Boston, put an end to the Constitution of Massachusetts. All the trials in the colonies were to be heard by a British judge in the Britain. Colonists had to feed British soldiers and shelter them. The 5th one was related to Quebec and Ohio.
First Continental Congress, held in Carpenter's Hall, Philadelphia, had delegates from each of the colonies to represent them, and they were deciding what to do about Britain and its taxation laws, and also the intolerable acts.